Next on Unsolved Mysteries, a man is found dead, apparently from natural causes, but then an autopsy reveals he'd been murdered. Wild West outlaws battle over a fortune in gold and jewels. Is the treasure buried here in Skeleton Canyon? A bank president and his family are taken hostage by robbers who make off with close to $1 million. And it was a terrifying case of home invasion. 3 people are left dead, and a killer is on the loose. These are stories you won't want to miss. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. Hood River, Oregon. Eric Tamiyasu and Diana Anderson had been just friends for years, and then they decided to take it to the next level.
It was just kind of checking each other out and seeing if maybe this is someone that I would like to spend more time with, and I think it was the same for both of us.
What do you do for fun?
Golf.
Late in the evening, the date seemed to be going very well, until the couple heard some mysterious tapping noises outside.
What was that?
Then, someone was at the front door. They heard the sound of footsteps running away, but they didn't see anyone.
It was not funny at that time of night when I have to get in my car and drive home by myself.
This would be the first and last date Diana Anderson would ever have with Eric Tamiyasu. Eric's home was located in a remote area outside of town. A week after Eric's date with Diana, Don Dixon, a friend and business consultant, went to Eric's house to check on him.
Hey, Eric! Eric, it's Don. You home?
Dixon says that for several days, he had been getting phone calls from Eric's friends who also had not been able to reach him.
Eric, you home? It's Don.
Dixon claims he used the key Eric had given him to get in through a back door. He was hit by a foul smell.
Eric?
It was an odor that I'd never smelled before. My initial hope was that this was the garbage that I had seen left out. There was no question in my mind that he was dead. So I said a prayer, I went downstairs, and I called 911 and asked for assistance.
When I first walked in, it appeared to me that we were dealing with an unintended death, a medical problem, or a heart attack, those kind of things. There was no sign of trauma that we could see right off, nothing to indicate that there was any kind of foul play.
As Eric Tamiyasu's body was being removed from his house, Hood River County Sheriff Joe Wampler approached Don Dixon with a strange request.
Does Eric have a burn pile around here?
And he said, we've looked for a gun, we've looked for bullet holes, we've looked for shells. To spare the family grief and discomfort, we're going to bring the bedding out, and we want you to burn it.
Piece of earth over there, I could burn it there.
And I said, if it would help the family, I would be happy to do what I can to assist.
The following morning, Dixon set fire to the soiled bedding from Eric's room. When he was done, there was nothing left but a metal frame and a pile of ashes. The next day, during Eric's autopsy, investigators were shocked to learn that 3 small-caliber bullets were found lodged in Eric's head. What at first seemed like a natural death was now a homicide investigation. The investigation was not off to a good start. Eric Tamiaso didn't seem to have any enemies, so no one had assumed foul play. The decomposition of the body had disguised the exact cause of his death, and the most important piece of evidence, the bed, had gone up in smoke.
Based on the lack of evidence that this was going to turn into a criminal case, it was my decision to burn the bed because the family might appreciate not having to go through the trauma of viewing the horrid things that were left behind.
But could the sheriff have had a more personal, sinister motive for destroying the evidence? A possible answer may have come up in a conversation Don Dixon said he had with Eric regarding a new romantic relationship.
There's this Polynesian woman I've been seeing a little bit.
This Polynesian woman described as older than he was, and the rumor mill has that the sheriff's wife is Polynesian and older than Eric. But that could be purely coincidental.
I've heard a rumor that my wife was having an affair with Mr. Tamiasu. And out of retaliation for that, then I went up there and did these things. Even went to the trouble of destroying the evidence, burning the bed and all that stuff. All I can say is they're looking in the wrong direction.
If Sheriff Wampler had nothing to do with the murder, then who did? A second potential suspect is Eric Smith, Eric Tamiaso's lifelong friend.
Okay, what have we here?
There's two of us involved here. That's just not you.
Don Dixon says that he overheard an intense argument between the two Erics just a few days before the murder.
He and Eric Smith had been in business together, and Eric Tamiasu felt that Eric was pocketing money.
Well, what's all these expenditures, you know? It's supposed to go into the business, and here you're going out and blowing it like this.
And that he owed him between $50,000 and $60,000.
Hey, Eric, is everything okay?
According to Dixon, Eric Tamiaso was quite upset after the
What do
argument.
you want me to do? Just eat the $56,000?
I asked him if he was okay, if everything was all right. He said, "That son of a bitch," and got into his car, and that's the last words that I heard from Eric Tamiasu.
I can tell you flat out for a fact, Eric and I did not have an argument. Eric didn't owe me money, I didn't owe him money. Don lives in a fantasy world.
Eric Tamiasu and Eric Smith did have a side business together, selling used cars. But police believe that there was much less money involved than Don Dixon had said.
When I checked into the business dealings with Eric Smith and Eric Tamiasu, we found out they both invested the same amount of money, which was probably $15,000 to start this business, not $50,000 or $60,000. And it kind of went downhill, and then they had to go out of business.
So who else had a reason to kill Eric Tamiasu? Potential suspect number 3, Don Dixon. The man who discovered the body. It was Don Dixon who notified Eric's sister of her brother's death just minutes after he discovered his body.
Well, I came out to his house, I found Eric, and he's dead. Look,
She remembers that what Don said next was very strange.
He said it didn't look like there was any foul play, and it also appeared that there weren't any exit wounds. And I said, what are exit wounds? What are you talking about?
It was like from a bullet.
I said, what? Why would there be gunshot wounds?
Well, I clearly looked closely at the body to try and see if he had shot himself. I mean, because that was one of my first reactions, was it was suicide. He had been very depressed. And I had looked closely because of that. I mean, I honestly believe that a logical reason Eric was dead in bed was suicide.
With 3 bullets lodged in his head, Eric's death was clearly not suicide. Did one of these 3 men murder Eric Tamiasu, or could someone else have pulled the trigger?
Not again.
In one final twist, Diana Anderson says that when she and Eric heard the strange noises outside, they went to investigate and they found a single footprint. Could that clue have identified Eric's killer? Investigators will never know. Heavy rains washed it away days later.
I don't know if the events on Saturday night had anything to do with Eric's murder or if it was just coincidence. I think it's a possibility, but I don't know.
Did the sheriff deliberately destroy evidence in the case?
I did not have anything to do with the death of Eric Tomiyasu, no.
Could Eric Smith have wanted Eric Tomiyasu dead?
Eric was my best friend. I mean, he was the best man at my wedding. He was like my brother.
Did Don Dixon tell the truth about his connection to the murder?
I have no way of knowing who was involved with Eric Tomiyasu's death. The only ones that I know that didn't do it are my wife and myself. Other than that, everybody else in my mind is suspect.
All the suspects in this case passed polygraph tests arranged by the Hood River County Sheriff's Office, except Don Dixon. Dixon eventually took an independently administered polygraph. The Sheriff's Department says the results were inconclusive. Someone in Hood River has gotten away with murder. If you have any information in this case, please log on to Unsolved.com. Coming up, a Wild West ambush and tales of a multi-million-dollar buried treasure. But first, a young computer wizard hacks into the Pentagon's secret computer network. Los Angeles, California. Kevin Polson got his first computer on his 16th birthday. It turns out that Polson was a natural computer whiz, and it wasn't long before he was hacking into computer networks using the alias Dark Dante. Polson uncovered a telephone number which gave him access to a restricted computer network funded by the Pentagon. Polson managed to hack into a computer that held sensitive documents on military research being conducted at the University of California at Berkeley. The university became aware of Dark Dante's visits when one day Polson accidentally logged on using his real name.
Dan, would you just put that in my car, please?
Well, you taking my computer?
The Los Angeles DA confiscated Polson's computer. Because of his age, he wasn't charged, but he was warned that his computer activities were illegal.
Like stealing or anything? No,
But that warning didn't stop Kevin Polson.
Your buddy's going to jail.
4 years later, in Northern California, the owners of a storage facility opened up a unit on which the rent hadn't been paid.
Whoa!
The locker contained what looked like stolen telephone company equipment. The owners called the police.
We found a storage locker that contained pieces of electronic equipment, payphones, computer printouts, including the printout of the non-published number of the Soviet Embassy in San Francisco. That's not the type of equipment or material that one would buy at a swap meet or find in a dumpster. It was quite obviously stolen property.
The storage unit had been rented to Kevin Polson, who was now 21 years old. When police searched his apartment, they found a wiretapping facility in a spare bedroom.
What are you doing with all this stuff, Kevin? The equipment in the switch room allowed Mr. Polson not only to enter computer databases, ours and others, but also gave him the ability to monitor telephone conversations without the parties to the conversation being aware that they were being monitored. How about the test set over there with the lettering on it?
Connected to Polson's computer was an unauthorized test set, which can be used to tap into private phone lines.
I don't know. I got that from a buddy of mine.
Only the telephone company and law enforcement officials are allowed to use test sets. But the smoking gun was a series of photographs Polson had taken of himself breaking into a telephone switching trailer and using the equipment inside. It was time to bring in the FBI.
We determined that the acts that Polson was involved in had escalated. we found evidence that Paulson had penetrated the United States government computer and had transferred the passwords of that computer via electronic mail to other individuals.
Investigators found out that someone matching Paulson's description had illegally entered several Northern California telephone facilities using a fake ID.
Hi, can I help you?
Yeah, from the Menlo Park office. I'm here to check out the ESS.
The ESS equipment is up on the second floor.
Once inside, the intruder found telephone numbers that he could use to hack into the telephone company's computer system. He had also stolen manuals, switching equipment, and a test set like the one found in Paulson's apartment. Using the stolen equipment, Paulson had allegedly infiltrated U.S. military computer transmissions to obtain classified Army information. Authorities believe he also obtained information about the U.S. government's investigation of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. The FBI suspected that Paulson might have been engaging in espionage. After a 2-year investigation, a 19-count indictment was handed down against Kevin Paulson and 2 fellow hackers. They were charged with conspiracy, computer fraud, wiretapping, embezzlement, and theft of public property and records. The 2 other men were arrested, but Paulson disappeared. Update. Shortly after this story aired, the FBI received information that Kevin Paulson was living near Los Angeles.
Our San Francisco office had advised us that Paulson had some acquaintances in the Los Angeles area. And we went out and interviewed those acquaintances, and one of them advised us that he had been seen in the not-too-distant past at Hughes Market. We then went out and interviewed all of the employees at Hughes Market and displayed his photograph.
The FBI informed me that Kevin Paulson had been seen at the Van Nuys Hughes Market at about 10 or 10:30 in the evening. I decided to surveil the market, thinking Kevin may show up again. At about 10 minutes to midnight, Kevin Paulson arrived, drove up and parked immediately in front of the market. Once Kevin was in the store, I took a position near the front door and asked the security guard to go find the evening manager so I could tell him that Kevin Paulson was in the store.
But as Paulson was checking out and about to leave the store, he was grabbed by 2 employees.
Security!
The security guard escorted Paulson to a storeroom where he was held until FBI agents arrived and placed him under arrest. Kevin Paulson pleaded guilty to 7 counts of mail, wire, and computer fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 51 months in prison and ordered to pay $56,000 in restitution. When Kevin was released from prison, he was also given 5 years probation. After prison, Kevin Paulson reinvented himself as a journalist and put his criminal past behind him. He wrote a computer script capable of searching the membership of MySpace for sex offenders. He ultimately confirmed the identity of more than 700 sex offenders who had MySpace profiles. Next, Unsolved Mysteries searches for buried treasure in a place called Skeleton Canyon. And later, a pair of violent criminals take a bank president and his family hostage. Along Arizona's eastern border is a jagged ravine called Skeleton Canyon. More than 100 years ago, a gang of Mexican smugglers were ambushed and robbed within the steep canyon walls. Some say the take from that robbery was buried in this area, an undiscovered treasure worth millions. For years, treasure hunters have searched in Skeleton Canyon. They've turned up bleached bones and old Mexican coins, but no treasure. Not yet, anyway. So is there really a buried treasure in Skeleton Canyon? Well, it all depends on who you ask.
It's a known fact that it's a real treasure. This is one of the treasures that's absolutely real.
No, I don't believe that there is a Skeleton Canyon treasure waiting out there to be found.
The legend of the Skeleton Canyon treasure starts in a small Mexican village. Jim Hughes, a member of Arizona's infamous Curly-Bill Brocious gang, learned that Mexican bandits looted the town of Monterrey, Mexico.
We're going. We're done.
They were planning to smuggle the fortune into the United States through Skeleton Canyon.
¿Dónde vives tú? Culiacán? Wasabi. Sí.
Hughes was able to infiltrate them because he spoke fluent Spanish, and he found out that the gang was coming back to Skeleton Canyon. The myriad of books and treasure magazines reported the treasure to be worth anywhere from $2.5 million all the way, and I've seen reports of it being worth up to $8 million.
Hughes rode back to Arizona and made plans with Curly-Bill Brocious to ambush the Mexican gang.
The men in the rocks shot the Mexicans off their mounts, and the coins and the contraband were being scattered all over the canyon. In order to stop the mules from scattering and taking the loot with them, the Curly-Bill Brocious gang was shooting the mules.
The outlaws now had their treasure, but without mules, they had no way of moving it out of the canyon. Part of the loot was divided up on the spot. The rest was buried, to be picked up later. But two members of the gang had other plans.
Zwing Hunt and Billy Grounds were friends, and they decided that while the rest of the gang was out in the local bars spending their money, they would double-cross the gang and come back into the canyon. According to the legend, they were able to find a Mexican teamster, talked him into bringing his team and his horses into Skeleton Canyon and removing the treasure. And of course, he was later killed because they wanted to keep the new hiding place as a secret. I feel very sure in my own mind that it's very likely that the treasure is still buried within the vicinity of Skeleton Canyon, probably no more than 30 miles away.
Zwing Hunt and Billy Grounds hid in a desert cave where they lived for close to 4 months. During this period, Billy Grounds wrote a number of letters to his sister Maggie in San Antonio. Billy wanted her to know where the treasure was hidden in case anything happened to him. Billy would venture out once a week to give the letters to a passing stagecoach.
Get this too. Yeah, you bet.
Treasure hunter Fern Hamill claims that he's seen the 9 letters.
One of the letters, he's writing to his sister, he said there's a cave at the mouth of the canyon. I found that cave, and he goes back 80 feet. And in one of the things in the letter, it said, from our lookout, you can see the turf growing back over where we buried the treasure, down in the valley there. I have found all the clues that there is in the letters, every one of them. Everything is there, so I know the treasure is, I'm near where it's at. It's there.
Billy Grounds, who is supposed to have written the letters, was a 19-year-old Texas cowboy rustler type. It's unlikely to me that he would have been writing home detailed letters about, hey, we robbed these Mexicans and buried this huge treasure. Here's how to find it.
Maggie was Billy Grounds' sister, and her and a man had spent 2 years living in a cave out there looking for this treasure, and we found this vase in a cave. It says Maggie on it, 1885, World's Fair. So I know that was Billy Ground's sister that was there looking for this treasure.
A sheriff's posse finally cornered Billy Grounds and Zwing Hunt. During the shootout, Billy was killed. Zwing, seriously injured.
Buried with turf grass.
As the story goes, after his capture, Zwing revealed the secret location of the treasure to his uncle.
Near Gum Springs.
His uncle then drew up a detailed map.
It seems to me that it's another typical treasure hunting yarn. We never get to see the map. We never get to examine it for its genuineness or see if it matches up with any handwriting samples we might have.
Vern Hamill says that he's seen the map that was made up by Zwing Hunt's uncle.
The map shows the canyon, and it shows where the cave is. Everything matches. But on account of the earthquake in 1886, I think the treasure is around 20 feet deep. Part of the mountain caved off on it.
Is there really a treasure buried in Skeleton Canyon? Or is it just another tall tale from the days of the Old West?
I think the Skeleton Canyon treasure is a very plausible story from the standpoint that every time it would rain, somebody's skull would show up or another coin would become evident. And compared to a lot of other stories, it's got a lot more plausibility than I would say the Lost Dutchman mine, for instance.
It is possible that there's a Skeleton Canyon treasure out there to be found somewhere, but the initial reports given by the Mexican government, given in the local press, indicate that there was a very small amount of money taken, which would have been spent very, very quickly. Thus, I don't think there was a treasure, given historical sources, to find.
When I find the treasure, I'll stop looking for it. That's it, will be when I'll stop. Because I know it's real. This treasure is real, and I know I've found the right place where it's at.
Today, fortune hunters from all over the world search through Skeleton Canyon, trying to find the lost treasure. Despite the doubts of the skeptics, they will continue to look and look, because to them, the treasure of Skeleton Canyon is still an unsolved mystery. Coming up, an escaped convict is finally in custody after 9 years on the run. But first, the story of two bank robbers who took a family hostage and vanished with close to $1 million. West Dallas, Wisconsin. After locking 14 bank employees in a storeroom, two armed robbers clean out the vault. When they leave, their duffel bags are stuffed with $750,000. The thieves were identified as Terry Lee Connors and Joseph Doherty. They were serial bank robbers. The tools of their trade were dynamite, grenades, submachine guns, and hostages. 18 months earlier, Connor and Doherty were inmates at a federal prison in Oklahoma. One morning, they were shackled by U.S. Marshals before being taken to a courtroom in Oklahoma City.
In the strip search, they missed the handcuff key, which one story has it that Connor had planted it down inside his mouth.
Steve, that's it, fire! He's got my... All right, take that exit.
Somewhere along the way, Connor and Doherty took possession of the vehicle. I understand from talking to the deputy that he stripped the gun from him in about 2 seconds.
The convicts handcuffed the two marshals and then forced them into the back seat.
Go. Go outside. Move, come on. Move. Right there.
They drove to a secluded area.
Move, move.
The deputies were, I'm sure, very scared. Anybody would have been in that situation. There was a quiet moment when the two deputies were handcuffed around the tree when Connor indicated that he wanted to eliminate the two deputies. He advanced toward the deputies with his weapon and had the weapon pointed at them and looked over at Doherty and nodded his head as if to say, I'm going to go ahead and kill them.
Let's go. Let's go.
Joe Doherty replied to him, no, they've been good guys. They'll be okay if we leave them handcuffed around this tree. So it looked like there was a few moments there where the deputies were in jeopardy of their lives.
Connor and Doherty fled from Oklahoma north all the way to Vancouver, Washington. Their plan was to pull off their biggest bank robbery yet. They went to the home of Ray Deering on the pretext of buying a car, but they weren't interested in the car. Ray was the vice president of a local bank.
Is it possible we can go inside and talk about it?
Yeah, I guess so. Neither one would ever let me walk around him. They would always turn their bodies, and I never saw their backs. And I realized later they had their .45s and belts behind their back.
Once inside, Ray and his son Tom were easily overpowered. Ray's wife, Ronnie, was brought in from the bedroom. The fugitives held the family hostage overnight. Early the next morning, they changed into business suits to look like bank executives.
Okay, you drive. I'll drive.
We didn't know what to expect when we got there. We didn't know if we were in for problems, if the police had arrived, and certainly we didn't want the police there at this point because we knew there'd be a shootout if there was. He said if the police arrived, they would spray the bank with gunfire.
The group arrived at the bank before any of the employees, but the vault couldn't be opened without two keys held by separate tellers.
Ray, I want you to come with me.
My biggest concern during this whole time was that they separated us. I had no idea what was going on with my family.
For the next 20 minutes, as bank employees arrived, their teller's keys were confiscated and they were taken to a back room.
Let's go.
Connor and Doherty then entered the vault and stuffed $250,000 into two duffel bags in less than 60 seconds.
After they got their money, they took me into the room with the rest of the employees and my family.
All right, nobody opens the door for 10 minutes.
At that time, I knew we were finally safe. They were not taking any hostages. My sole thought was, thank God you're all safe. And I put my arms around the family and the employees and broke up.
Update. Terry Lee Connor and Joseph Doherty have been arrested. The FBI and the U.S. Marshals suspected that the fugitives were in a suburb of Chicago and distributed wanted posters in the area. A local motel clerk noticed a guest registered under the name Stephen Posick, one of Connor's aliases. She called authorities, and within an hour, the FBI and U.S. Marshals began a stakeout. Connor was arrested the next morning when he left his room. He was returned to prison where he began serving out a life sentence. 2 weeks later, Joseph Doherty was arrested at a laundromat in Antioch, California. Incredibly, agents were keeping surveillance on a different suspect, but at the laundromat, they recognized Joseph Doherty as a wanted fugitive. Doherty was arrested and sent back to prison. He won't be eligible for parole until 2019. Next, two violent fugitives are on the run. They were armed and dangerous until our viewers saw them on Unsolved Mysteries.
Next, we have two stories, and thanks to our viewers, 2 cases solved.
Las Vegas, Nevada. Businessman Frank Allen from Los Angeles bought a home just outside the city. He kept a room there to use during his frequent trips to Nevada. he rented the rest of the house to a man named Joseph Weldon Smith and his wife, Judith. 2 daughters from a previous marriage, 12-year-old Christy and 20-year-old Wendy, also lived there. What Frank Allen didn't know was that Smith had a long history as a con man. He had once been convicted of attempted grand theft, but that was nothing compared to what Joe Smith did next. Frank Allen arrived at his Las Vegas residence on a night when he expected Smith and his family to be out of town.
I locked the door behind me and went up the top of the steps and unlocked the bedroom and went in. I started undressing, took off my jacket, shirt, tie, and suddenly stopped in my track and said, "Something is wrong." I said, "I don't know what it is, but something is wrong."
Joe, what the hell are you doing?
I grabbed him at the wrist, and that's when I shook him and I said, "Joe, what in the hell are you trying to do?" And then it was clear to me that he was trying to murder me. Coming down the steps, I said, "I've locked myself in with these double deadbolts, and I don't have time to fumble for keys," so I went straight through the door. I drove my car up to the guard gate and said to the guard, "Call the police, there's a man in my house."
Come on out, Joe.
The police searched the house. They thought they had cornered Joe Smith hiding under a blanket. Instead, they found the body of 12-year-old Christy Cox, Smith's stepdaughter.
I think we got a homicide here, right?
She had been strangled and bludgeoned to death.
It was obvious that she had been dead for quite some time. She had several wounds to the face and to her head. In the next bedroom, they forcefully entered that also, and that's when Wendy Cox was found laying beside the bed. She had approximately 32 wounds to her head and hands, defensive wounds to her hands, and she had also been strangled.
Then officers searched the master bedroom. They found the body of Joe Smith's wife, Judith. She had also been bludgeoned to death. All 3 have been dead for approximately 18 hours. Joe Smith was now wanted for murder and attempted murder with a deadly weapon. Update. Just minutes after we aired this story on Unsolved Mysteries, a viewer reported that Smith was living near Los Angeles, California. Smith was arrested at a local motel where he was registered under an assumed name.
At the time of his arrest, Joe Smith indicated to me that he had seen the last airing of the Unsolved Mystery program. He also told me that it was very tough being a fugitive, and he always knew that someone would be knocking at the door one day. He was kind of glad it's all over at this point.
2 days later, Joe Weldon Smith was returned to Nevada. He was convicted for the murder of his wife and 2 daughters and sentenced to death.
In our next update, a bank robber escapes from prison to live a life on the run with his wife.
For 8 years, Thomas Leo Langstone and his wife lived in this small bungalow in St. Paul, Minnesota. No one ever suspected that Langstone was an escaped convict named Richard Cepolonis with a long criminal record. Cepolonis and 2 accomplices had robbed a bank in Woburn, Massachusetts, and made off with more than $17,000. Cepolonis was convicted of bank robbery and armed assault. He was sentenced to between 58 and 82 years in prison. Then he met Karen Walters. Karen was an aspiring teacher whose class assignment was to write letters to inmates. Eventually, she visited Richard.
You're much prettier than your picture.
And a relationship began.
How was the drive?
Oh, it was fine. Thank you.
A typical inmate in prison, I find, takes advantage of people out in the community. Oftentimes, they'll latch on to women who are lonely, want some attention, and they take advantage of them. And I think the women are beguiled by all that attention.
Hi, Karen. Take Richard to be my husband.
Hi, Karen. Take Richard to be my husband.
8 years after they met, Richard Cepalonis and Karen Walters got married in the prison chapel. 2 years later, Cepalonis escaped and the couple disappeared. Update. After our broadcast, a viewer in Minneapolis who had done business with the couple recognized Karen's photograph. During a stakeout of their home, officials tailed Cepalonis to a nearby convenience store.
As soon as he pulled into the parking lot and got out of the vehicle, one of the task force members was right there with him, so he jumped out, drew his weapon, ordered Cepalonis not to move, and at that point other task force members got there, jumped out and assisted in the arrest.
Karen Walters was picked up 20 minutes later.
When I found out that they were who they were, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. My mouth fell to the floor. I never would imagine in a million years that these two people would do anything wrong.
Despite what neighbors thought, a bag of suspicious items found inside the house suggested that Cepalonis was still an active criminal.
The discovery of the bag with the face mask, the gun, the rubber gloves, and a large amount of cash and small bills, we think that perhaps he's been back in the bank robbery or robbery business again.
Karen Walters and Richard Cepalonis were extradited to Massachusetts. Cepalonis was sent back to prison. Karen Walters served a short sentence and was released. If you have any information on the cases presented tonight, log on to Unsolved.com.